Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at our favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Tom Browning.
With my co-hosts, Rob Berger and Mike Browning.
We can be heard on Google Play, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and of course, our website at gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. That's gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. Please check it out. You can capture all of our episodes on our webpage. You can contact us by just clicking on the contact bar. You can leave a message. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about the players that you would like for us to profile. Love to hear about maybe some of the seasons other than the 60s, 70s, and 80s that really made an impact on you as a fan. Again, we will be going off the menu every once in a while. We'll be talking about the current day New York Rangers, the state of the franchise, previous playoff games, impactful trades that took place in New York Rangers history. So wherever you listen to us, please hit subscribe. It's free. So without further ado,
here are your hosts, Tom Browning, Mike Browning, and Rob Berger.
Thanks for tuning in and welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. I'm Tom Browning along with my great friend and broadcast partner Rob Berger. My son Mike Browning is on a work assignment today, so he will not be joining us. Rob, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. How are you, Tom?
Not too bad, thank you. Doing well. It seems like forever since we had our last show, talking a little Jimmy Nielsen. Now, obviously, the Rangers have gotten a good 15, 16 games under their belt, and I think we agreed after the last show that we would have a better feel for what this team is going to be about going through the rest of the season. What are your initial impressions after the first quarter of the season, Rob?
I'm probably in the minority. Maybe it's easy for me because I'm not a lifelong diehard Ranger fan, but I'm pretty optimistic about this group. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of things to look at. Shishkin, I don't think, he hasn't been as, he's not that Calder candidate that we were talking about, but he's been serviceable. He's been above average. Adam Fox has just been fantastic.
Yep.
Keandre Miller's been playing well. I see a future in Capo Caco. Lafreniere finally got a goal over the weekend. But that's fine too. Again, he doesn't play. If you look back at some of the first round picks, the last 6-7 years, it's been a slow start for most of them. I'm not as down on Zibanejad. He's generating offense. Him and Buchnevich, that line is gonna, I think is gonna click. I really do. I mean, Zibanejad's shooting percentage is low. All the things that make you think like he has to regress back up, get back to doing better. So I know it's been a struggle. And who was it? When he scored that empty net goal, I think it was Buchnevich that ripped the monkey off his back.
Yep.
Can't remember if it was him or Strome. But yeah, listen. This isn't on paper. Looking at this team, they weren't in the top 4 to begin the season.
No.
So listen, they could be Buffalo.
Yes.
They could be a team like Nashville that's falling apart with huge contracts and not saying everybody's for sale pretty much. Listen, they have a lot of talent in the minors. I don't know how much you agree with what I'm saying, but I don't think Rangers, with the exception of the news that's come out about Panarin, which is horrible, and hopefully that doesn't, that's not something that takes him away for too long. I think there's reason to be optimistic.
Yeah.
And just get through the season. Don't make any dumb trades to try to get into the playoffs.
Bingo. Totally right. Now, being a diehard Ranger fan, obviously, and, my brother-in-law and my son Mike and all of our friends and whatnot, I mean, we all, most of us feel the same way you do, but we're not quite as detached, obviously, as you are. So when they do play a lousy game or they do lose a heartbreaking game or you see the kids struggling, you start, you start losing your objectivity and you get a little frustrated. But you got, like you said, you got to bring it back to a perspective where, this is a young team. They're not supposed to be a contender at this point in time. It's just not realistic. And you got to give the kids some breathing room. You got to give the kids some time and space to develop. And they do have a lot of good young talent. The problem with the team right now, as I see it, and we talked about this during the last show, Rob, and with Mike, is that we were wondering what the regression was going to be with Zibanejad. We all agreed that there probably would be a statistical regression or performance regression with him, because you can't maintain that same shooting percentage and goal scoring percentage that he had last year, which was otherworldly, right? But I think what the concerning part with Zibanejad is that he's been playing his last couple of games were actually his worst games.
Yeah.
Where he really was being knocked off the puck. He was all over the place. He was not in a good defensive position. He was out of position a lot. He doesn't seem to have the stamina or the strength. Something's going on there. So that's a concern. And if he doesn't at least approach 80% of where he was last year, then this team absolutely has no shot for the playoffs. And it doesn't look like he's going to be able to flip a switch starting Wednesday against the Flyers, I don't think, where he'll just start piling up the goals. Now, Kakko was definitely improving, but he's still not finishing. He's still not scoring like we thought he would. Lafreniere, good to see him get that second goal, but now instead of being on par for 8 goals this year, maybe it's 9 or 10 if he continues, but we'd like to start seeing him fill the net, and maybe he'll get that opportunity with Panarin now. God only knows how long Brett is going to be out of commission with the Rangers. So maybe this opens up an opportunity for Lafreniere, for Kakko to start taking on more of the offensive leadership for the club. It's not happening with Kreider, and Buchnevich is really, I think, regressing. His offensive game is regressing to where it was actually at the beginning of last year. He's not scoring the goals like he did the latter part of last year or the first very beginning of this year. So I'm a little bit worried about Buchnevich. Not so much about his defensive game, but his offensive game. And this team is having an awful, when Blackwell is your leading goal scorer, then this team's in trouble if he's going to be your go-to goal scorer for the club. So, everything else you said is right. Fox has been awesome. Lindgren's been great. Miller has been very, very, very strong. And Strome, I think, Strome, I know you and Mike don't think much of this guy, but he's got 100 points in 149 games. Not too many Rangers that I can think of that have played with this team recently have 100 points in their first 149 games as a New York Ranger. So the guy is tough. He's a tough booger. He's got some swag to him, and he's tough down low, and he gets he gets some important goals. I think Strome's an important part of this club.
Yeah, and the point Mike and I make is that if you're going to flip someone, Strome's the guy. If they're gonna make a trade, they should go after Jack Eichel. Give up all the picks.
But they're gonna have to give
up all the picks. You don't know what picks are worth. Picks could bust. Jack Eichel is great. Jack Eichel, he's done, and Jeff Skinner, a healthy scratch. He's got to get out of there.
I know. Well, the problem they have is that giving up all your draft picks for Jack Eichel, that's going to be enough. They're probably going to want Lafreniere. They're probably going to want maybe Kakko
which is obviously untouchable.
No, of course. So, I think there are some other teams, maybe even LA, that might be in better shape to go after Jack Eichel.
Yeah, that's an interesting situation. The Kings are the hottest team in hockey. They've won 5 in a row. The kids, specifically Gabe Velarde, looks so good. Mikey Anderson on the top pairing with your daddy. But I'm so afraid the Rangers are going to make a dumb trade.
Well, that's the concern you have with John Davidson running the show, and Gordon's probably feeling a lot of heat. I mean, I was listening to a lot of XM Hockey, Sirius NHL Network. I think I mentioned this to you on the way back from North Carolina, and they were just singing the praises of the Blackhawks. They were contrasting the Rangers, Blackhawks, and Kings, the youngest teams in the league, and how they're playing. And they just raved about the job that the Blackhawks are doing. They're starting their young goaltender, the LA Kings, and that the Rangers are their young talent was just not getting it done. They were just singing the praises of the LA Kings and the Chicago Blackhawks. So the Rangers really have to get, the young kids, not to say they have to make the playoffs, obviously, but the young kids have to start showing something.
One thing to keep in mind, though, the Blackhawks and Kings, is they have so much veteran leadership that are true veteran, have a lot of miles besides Kreider. I mean, who else is there?
You're right, and they're not leaders. I mean, Kreider's not a leader, and I've said this. He's not a leader, and the other guys, you're right. Zibanejad, some of the older guys, the veterans like Jack Johnson and Smith, they don't play enough to be considered real leaders of the club. Yeah, they just have a lack of. There isn't a lot of veteran presence there.
I mean, they have four guys over 30 and over, and
right.
One of them's Keith Kincaid. One of them's, you got Jack Johnson and Brendan Smith that don't play every night, and the other is, Anthony Bitetto.
Right. Who's been great, by the way. He's been great.
He has less than 200 games in the NHL.
Right. And Kincaid has been playing in Providence. I've been playing at New Haven or Hartford.
Yeah. The rosters are funny right now because with taxi squads and things like that.
Right.
Everybody's on the team right now. No, I was just say that that's a huge thing to keep in mind. Not having a lot of older guys. I mean, in contrast, the Kings have 5 guys over 30, and they all have a ton of games under their belt.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's a great mix. They really are doing it the right way. It's funny you mentioned Shesterkin. Everyone's saying Shesterkin before the season started. But Blackwood of the Devils, Mackenzie Blackwood has been awesome.
He came back, from his break, not as strong, but man, was he good before he went out. Those first 4 games, man, first 5 games, he looked great. And then 4 games, and then I still don't think the Rangers are in better shape than the Devils.
Well, we'll see. They beat us twice in a row now. We'll have to see. The Devils are also another young team, but we'll see. But I think it's the Penguins, the Bruins, the Flyers. Who am I missing?
The Islanders.
The Islanders. I think those are still the 4 teams that have. Oh, the Islanders. They had a little bit of a dip there, a little bit of a lull, but you got probably 2 of the most underrated defensive pair in Pelech and Pulak that are just incredibly strong defensive combination. And you got Nick Leddy is making a serious resurgence this season. He's a beast, that guy. He really is a special athlete, very underrated. And Barzal is doing his thing. That fourth line keeps on clicking. I know you guys don't think much of that fourth line, but they keep on playing an important role for that club.
It's not that we don't think much of the fourth line. First of all, they're not the fourth line anymore with that team. They're the third line.
Yeah. I know. Exactly right.
There's the other line with like Komarov and guys,
right?
That's the fourth line. It's not that we don't think much of them. In a regular season, I don't see much of an impact. And I'm nothing against any of these guys. And trust me, I think most teams in the league would do well to have them on their teams. But these guys have 3 to 4 points in 18 games. So and they're playing 9.5 minutes a night. So I don't see the impact that you're seeing in the regular season. I don't doubt that their locker room impact is immeasurable, especially for the kids in the Islanders to have veterans like Martin Cizikas and Clutterbuck, who've been around this league, been in different markets. Martin spent time in Toronto. I think that makes such a difference for the youth. Something that again, that the Rangers don't really have, right? They don't have these guys that have been around for such a long time.
Right. It's funny, though, the most effective line for the Rangers has also been their fourth line with Lemieux, Rooney, and Blackwell, and they've been actually pretty strong. But, I think we have a little different opinion on that, the fourth line. I know Trotz thinks that they would not made the playoffs last year with them, and that the team would not be where they are right now. And because they're so good, they're actually a third-line team. So if they were just a bunch of spare parts, I don't think they would have risen to a third-line status. But we'll see. We'll see if they can sustain that. Yeah, it should be interesting. So let's get to our topic today, Rob. New York Rangers broadcasters. Interesting topic, not one that, we talk about much. And the Rangers have had a very interesting history going back to the 1940s with their broadcasters. But, I started following the team back in the 62, 63, 64 seasons when they never broadcasted their radio and TV games at the same time. If the game was not on TV, it might have been on radio, and vice versa. And there were some games where there was no coverage back in the early 60s. Not many, but some. But Win Elliott was the very first broadcaster that I was exposed to as a kid, 7, 8 years old, with back in 62, 63. And those games were on Channel 11. And if memory serves me correctly, oftentimes the games were picked up in progress at about 9 o'clock at night, especially on Saturdays. And, they would be picked up like in the middle of the first period or at the start of the second period. And I don't have a lot of recall of games being televised routinely from the drop of the puck in the first period to the very end of the game. But Win Elliott was the announcer, and he was a jack of all trades back then. I think he did a lot of wide world of sports. He did many, many different sports. But he was the Rangers' radio voice, along with Jim Gordon in the 60s. Jim Gordon did a lot of radio, and he would spell Win Elliott in the mid-60s as well on TV. Jim Gordon was the guy that I really loved listening to and watching. He became, the Rangers' radio voice in the probably 62, 63, 64 before Marv Albert took over. My very favorite announcer, starting in the 65, 66 season. But Jim Gordon became the TV announcer for the Rangers after Win Elliott. And with that deep baritone voice, he was the Rangers announcer for about 20 years, did a lot of Giants football. He did a lot of the Wins news on Wins Radio 1010. But before we get to Marv Albert, what are your initial impressions based on your research of the Rangers broadcast?
It was great going down memory lane. I guess it's not memory lane for me; it's learning. But first of all, how people don't realize, not coming from New York, how the family tree of New York broadcasters, how so many famous people came from here. There's obviously there's the obvious people like Marv Albert and so on, but whether it be Tim Ryan or Don Criqui, and now we have, up to Sam Rosen, who's a national guy, and now with Kenny Albert. So that, that's great. And then you can just go down one of those YouTube wormholes and just watch old highlights for hours and hours.
Yeah.
Pretty dangerous. I did not know the history of Bill Chadwick. The big whistle, that was fun to stumble on. And, we're privileged now, I have the hockey package. I'm watching any game, every broadcast, and anytime I want. But like you said, joining games at 9 o'clock, hoping. I remember being a kid hoping the Kings game was on TV. Not knowing if they would get preempted for something else because there's only one sports channel. And now it's not even a question, right? You could watch it anytime, watch the highlights anytime. But wow, it was fun. In those years with Mikey Ruzioni joining in, it was great.
Yeah, the Rangers have had, it's funny, there wasn't a lot of stability. I'd say the most stable part of the Rangers' broadcasting history was, I would have to say, in the mid-'60s when it was Marv Albert and Bill Chadwick doing the radio. Probably from the mid-'60s right down to I would say the mid-'70s. That was a very stable time for the Rangers because you did have Marv Albert doing the games exclusively on radio with very few interruptions. And you had the big whistle, the Hall of Fame referee, Bill Chadwick, who was a piece of work and very entertaining. And the two had a tremendous chemistry. They really, really did. And that coincided with some of the best Ranger teams in their history. The best, probably, and we should do a podcast on this, by position or team by team, the best homegrown talented Ranger team, and maybe we can do it by position too. Those were homegrown Ranger teams basically back in the mid-'60s to mid-'70s. And the broadcasting team was very, very solid with Marv on the radio. And then you had Jim Gordon and Bill Chadwick on TV when Sal Messina took over from Bill Chadwick on the color side with Marv on the radio. I mean, they were outstanding. So, Jim Gordon and Bill Chadwick were great on TV. You saw the YouTube stuff. I mean, there's a lot of good video of the Rangers and Flyers playoff games with Bill Chadwick and Jim Gordon. Great. Jim Gordon had a great ability to capture the sentiment of the crowd, just to take the temperature of the teams on the ice. He really had a great feel for the game, as did Marv. Marv Albert, to me, was probably the best hockey announcer I ever heard. And I'm going to try to, if I can do this editing properly, I'm going to try to splice in during our podcast here, Rob, I'm going to try to splice in some of the sounds of Bill Chadwick, Jim Gordon, Marv Albert, if I can, during this podcast, if I'm able to do it. And Bob Wolf. Bob Wolf was a color commentator on the Rangers side in the 70s too, and he had a chance to call some great games. One game in particular during the 69-70 season, the Bruins were undefeated at 30-some-odd straight home games, and Bob Wolf did the game for the Rangers, and the Rangers came in and won the game with 13 seconds to go in Boston. Billy Fairburn scored a goal off a feed from Walter Tkachuk, and the Rangers beat the Bruins 6-5 and destroyed that Bruins unbeaten streak at home. But yeah, they were some really good announcers. Marv Albert, to me, was the very best hockey announcer on radio the Rangers ever had. Jim Gordon, I think, was the very best television announcer they ever had. And you're right. They had some Tim Ryan in there for a couple of years. He was good. Even Mike Emrick, I think, did a few games for the Rangers, spelling some of their guys. So yeah, that was a very interesting time during the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s, things started really getting shaken up a little bit. What other thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I was talking to some other people about this and how we think who is the best and who is our favorite sometimes mixed together. Yeah. You say, are they the best? Is Gordon the best? I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just interesting because, he was so many formative years for you and some of the best years. And not, you say best years for the Rangers, best years for the Islanders too, which makes it good too, which makes it so good as well when you had all these Ranger Islanders games. And, a lot of the clips I watched of Gordon and Chadwick were Ranger Islander games, and just the excitement in their voices getting ready for those games. And I guess some Flyer games too. There's actually there's a good clip online if you could find it with Chadwick interviewing Jim Nielsen before a game.
Yes,
which was great. Which is great to watch.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so much fun watching these old highlights. I think announcers definitely meant more to us than they do now because there wasn't as many national broadcasts. And even now with NBC Sports and NHL Network, there's so many times the Rangers are pulled away and you're getting different broadcasters. So, and you don't get them all the way throughout the playoffs either. No, so many times during the playoffs, you're getting a national team, which is a disappointment. It would have been great. I'm sure as a Ranger fan in 2014, it would have been great hearing Sam Rosen calling those games with Joe Micheletti. Nothing. Right. Emrick and Olczyk do a great job, but you want to hear your own guys do the game. So, right. There's definitely. I don't think we get separated from our own announcers too often.
In the early 80s, you had Jim Gordon and Phil Esposito, and they had a nice chemistry too. Esposito was a very entertaining color commentator, and similar to Davidson in that, I think he was able to display his hockey knowledge, his knowledge of the league, his knowledge of the game, and that propelled him into a management job with the New York Rangers. And it kind of, it's reminiscent of the John Davidson situation where Davidson and Sam Rosen were together for almost 19 years, right? Starting in the mid-'80s and then up to like 2005, 2006. And the exposure that John Davidson got propelled him into a management spot, obviously with St. Louis and Columbus. So, and that same thing happened with Esposito. He left the booth after 2 years and became GM of the New York coach and GM of the New York Rangers for a few years. But yeah, I think the thing that kind of frustrated fans about Marv Albert was in the late 70s, early 80s, he took on so much outside of the New York Rangers, like the Knicks and the NFL, and I think he did some Major League Baseball, that he actually missed more games than he actually broadcast. And that's where you had the whole list of all these sub-announcers on the radio side that you alluded to with the Rangers. And that was kind of frustrating as being a fan because, especially on radio, I think people like stability. They look forward to the comfort of that familiar voice and the voice that knows the team inside and out. And when you have that substitute announcer going in there, whether it be color or even doing the play-by-play, it takes a little bit away from the broadcast. I think that was a knock on Marv Albert. That was a knock I had on him, and then he wound up announcing the seventh and deciding game of the 1993-94 Stanley Cup Final, where the Rangers won the Cup. And I think for the most of the season, that was Howie Rose, right?
Howie Rose had the Mattel call.
Yes. And, but Marv Albert did that seventh game on radio. Now, I was living in Illinois at the time, so I might be mistaken. I'm under the impression that was basically Howie Rose's season, announcing most of the Ranger games that year. And they brought Marv on, I think, for the Stanley Cup Finals because he had been the Ranger announcer forever during the formative years, and they wanted him to have a chance to announce a Stanley Cup winning game. But I could stand to be corrected. Again, I was watching the game in Illinois when they won. I was listening to the ESPN channel. So, I don't know if Marv was actually doing – I don't think that Marv was doing the Rangers the whole season that year. But, Marv was missing a lot of games in the 80s and 90s, and you had a lot of guys sitting in for him. And on TV, basically, it was very solid with Jim Gordon, and then he passed the baton to Sam Rosen. Then you had Sam Rosen and Espo, Sam Rosen and Davidson, and now Sam Rosen and Joe Micheletti. And on the radio side, I guess, you've had Stemkowski and Dave Maloney doing the color along with Don LaGreca. There was just something about Jim Gordon and Marv Albert. Sam Rose is a good announcer. I don't think he's a great announcer, and I'm not a real huge fan of Don LaGreca. I'm just not. To me, they're just not as good. Kenny Albert, he kind of has the same thing as his dad. He's not there all the time, right? So, I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? That lack of stability, the different voices that pop in and out of Ranger broadcasts.
Yeah, a lot of teams have that. John Forslund had, is one guy who actually he's actually taken a year away from Carolina because he's going to Seattle, but he did a lot of games for NBC. Doc Emrick when he was with the Devils. A similar thing. It does take away, but good for them, I guess, right? get that national paycheck. I'm sure it's a lot nicer than the MSG paycheck.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you see that a lot, I think, in the New York broadcasters have a real advantage doing national games because all the national studios are based out of New York City: CBS, NBC, ABC. And I think the New York announcers and all the sports, I think, get first dibs doing national broadcasts because you see it in the NFL with Kenny Albert and, Marv Albert doing the NBA and whatnot. So I think they have the inside track a lot on if you're a New York announcer and you're pretty good at what you do, I think you've got a great shot at, earning more money, earning more prestige, more visibility on national broadcasts. The thing that, I always reflect on was Sam Rosen when the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup saying, and this one will last a lifetime. And I remember cringing. Now, this should have been one of my most exciting moments in my life, and it was when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. And I wasn't listening to Sam Rosen. Who was the ESPN announcer, Rob?
Gary Thorne.
Gary Thorne, who I think is right up there with one of the best. Gary Thorne has a tremendous voice for hockey. He's the Baltimore Orioles baseball announcer too. But I used to love listening to Gary Thorne, love listening to Dan Kelly in the 70s and 80s, the former St. Louis Blues announcer whose two sons also announced NHL hockey. To me, the national announcers that were the best were Gary Thorne, Dan Kelly. Those were the two, my favorite. And Mike Emrick was probably my third in the top three. But Gary Thorne did a great job. But I didn't listen to Sam Rosen's until I heard it on videotape. And when he said, and this one will last a lifetime, I'm saying, oh my God.
Wow.
He just jinxed the New York Rangers. This one's going to last a lifetime. And everyone, now I didn't hear anyone complain about that. I'm saying, you got to be kidding me. That was one of the worst. Sam, I'm sorry, Sam, because you're a gentleman personified and you're good at what you do. Not my favorite, but you're good at what you do. To say that this one's going to last a lifetime, to me, I can't think of many worse one-liners winning a championship than that one. Can you, Rob?
Well, I wonder if more Ranger fans think that. I don't know. I've always heard Ranger.
They don't. You're right. They have no one has pushed back on it.
Because I always considered it a great call. in which, it's different from the Canadian style of calling a game, which is you shut up for the last 60 seconds and the 60 seconds after the final horn. But other teams, with the exception of Blackhawk fans getting at Olczek on color, didn't get to hear their announcers call the final game, and they don't do that anymore. When the Kings won their first Stanley Cup in 2012, Bob Miller called the game from one of the suites, and they just recorded it, but it wasn't official. It wasn't official.
I see. Another one of my favorite announcers. The few years I was in LA, I really enjoyed Bob Miller. He was excellent. I think he's still doing them, right?
No, he hasn't. He hasn't done them for about 3 or 4 years now. He had some health issues. He's still around. He's still around the team, but he doesn't call their games anymore. They got a young kid, Alex Faust, calling them now.
Gotcha. No, he was excellent when I lived out in L.A. I really enjoyed watching Bob Miller. I forget his sidekick, the color.
You were probably around for Nick Nixon, no?
Nick Nixon, yep.
He was
also pretty good.
Who does radio with Daryl Evans from the Miracle in Manchester.
Yep, that's right, Daryl Evans. Wow. Yeah, so, Rose and Micheletti do a decent job. They're okay. They're okay. Not huge fans of both of them. I think Micheletti, I think, is a little bit very kind of corporate to me. He doesn't. I like announcers I like guys who are on the edge a little bit, who walk the fine line. I mean, the New York Islanders, Butch Goring to me is a real homer, but he's not afraid to really blast an official, blast the Islanders, blast the opposing team. Micheletti and Sam Rose, I think they're just a little bit too reserved as far as doling out criticism of either the opposing team or the Rangers. Just a little bit too. And John Davidson was like that too. I like announcers that tell it like it is. If the team needs a kick in the butt, I like them to say that. And that's what Bill Chadwick, I think, was very good. Jim Gordon. Marv Albert, I thought, was very objective that way. He would tell them that the Rangers are being, run over by the old Bruins or whatnot. And I like that. I think that's important. I think fans respect that.
I hear what you're saying about Micheletti. I do like Micheletti, but he does even more outside than he's another guy that does a ton of hockey outside of New York. Who am I to criticize too much? I'm not a big Butch Goring fan anymore. I think Brendan Burke is spectacular. Also, another New York guy that does a ton of national games now. Heck, yeah. Even AJ Maleska, who does Islander games, also does national stuff for NBC. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I will say, just like I think all color commentators in baseball should be pitchers, I think every color commentator in hockey should be a goalie. I think they give the best. They give the best inside look of what's really happening out there. So I'm definitely, there's not a lot. My favorite is by far Darren Pang. When I'm not watching the Rangers or Kings, I'm watching Blues games just so I can listen to him. He provides such great insight to what's happening on the ice, and he's also a guy that I think is great. And I would like to see more of this from someone like Joe Micheletti, who really knows what's going on in the locker room, who is spending a ton of time with the team. And I know it's different with COVID right now, but is at community events and knows family. When you watch certain teams, you hear that from the color guys because they could talk about the players' families and their kids and things like that. And I don't get as much of that from the Ranger broadcast right now. No, you don't.
You don't get a lot of inside baseball with the New York Rangers. You just don't. You don't get a lot of that. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a corporate thing. You watch the Bruins broadcasts or even the Islanders. They're the focus here, and you seem to get more inside scoop, inside stuff. Other hockey teams, the Rangers don't go above and beyond in so many ways, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. And I think it translates to the broadcast booth too. I'm like you. I like to see a little bit more inside stuff when it comes to the Ranger players.
Yeah, from watching just other broadcasts around the league, with the exception of, I'm a big Valaket fan, not just because
I am
not
too.
Just because he's a former King, but I think he should get more airtime. the Rangers broadcast does not have a lot of enthusiasm compared to other teams.
Right.
And that's not just during the game, that's the studio also. And it's not just an enthusiasm, but fun on top of that. Whether it be watch Buffalo with Duff and Barone. I mean, it's just you could tell they're in the community, and I'm not saying that the Ranger guys aren't, but it's not just spilling out of them like it is in other markets. And I don't know if that's a factor of being in New York, and it's a little different here. It's not a small town, but I like to, when you watch even if you watch like Detroit or Los Angeles, which are big towns, you see that a little more than you do see it here.
Rob, I totally agree with you. Marty Baranch, he was in the studio at one time with the New York Rangers,
yes.
And he brought such humor and personality. Valaket is very good, and I think a lot of what you say is true, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that on radio I sense that. I mean, you got Don LaGreca, you got Kenny Albert, you got rotating announcers, and you got Stemkowski and Dave Maloney, and on TV, even though it's Micheletti for the most part and Sam Rosen, the production is lacking. You're right. It almost seems like it's not thrown together, but they don't give it a lot of thought. They're not creative. It looks like they don't spend a lot of time producing the very best broadcast that they can give the fan. It almost seems like it's just expedient. They're doing it in an expedient fashion, and I think because of that, you don't get that enthusiasm. But I'm totally with you. And I know it's harder with no fans in the stands and whatnot, and the team is not playing well. If the team is losing, it's tough to be, I guess, as enthusiastic. But the production could be better. The production could be more enthusiastic. And I think that a lot of that is Micheletti's personality. He's not a real, effervescent type of guy, right? He's not one to be out there, he's not controversial. And Sam Rosen, he's been around a long time, so I don't know if he's lost a little bit off his fastball as an announcer. I'm not a big fan of Don LaGreca on the radio. And Kenny Albert, he's okay, but he's not there a lot either. So I think that affects the energy of a broadcast. I really do believe that. Where the other teams, it's more stable and the production values are better. So, no, I really agree with you. I think the Rangers can do a lot better job. But Valaket, I think, is a star. I think he played for the Islanders, he played for the Rangers, played for the Kings, he played for almost everybody, I think. But he is a star in the making. I can see him doing a lot of national broadcasts when all's said and done.
I would hope so.
Anything else that you think we can touch on? Who's your favorite national broadcasters right now? I know Emrick is retired. He was probably my third best. Who do you like now from a national perspective?
I really like John Forslund. I think he's really good. When it comes to just going around games, I still think some of the Canadian guys are great. Chris Cuthbert, Ray Ferraro, they do a great job up there. There's nothing better than Kevin Bieksa in the studio in Canada right now. It's so funny. But yeah, I think it's my favorite broadcast, like I said, besides the Kings and Rangers, is St. Louis.
Yeah, well, I think Dan Kelly's son is doing them again. I think he
is,
right?
Yeah,
and he sounds just like his old man. I don't know if you saw any of Dan Kelly Sr.'s stuff. I mean, to me,
yes,
he was.
Of course, he called Bobby Orr's goal.
Yes,
and John Kelly is I don't know this if he's a huge fan of NCAA hockey, but if a guy played in the NCAA, he will tell you about it, and which I just love. Calling out guys and where they played is fantastic, and a big advocate for American hockey. And St. Louis is a huge. So many kids have come up through St. Louis through the years. It's the place for young American hockey right now, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, Dan Kelly was my all-time favorite outside of the Rangers. Dan Kelly, yeah, I would say Dan Kelly, hands down, was my favorite. Mike Emrick was probably third. Gary Thorne is probably second from outside of the Rangers. Marv Albert was, to me, number one on radio, no doubt about it. On TV, Jim Gordon and Bill Chadwick, the color. I think they were just a great team together, broadcast some of the best Ranger games outside of that Stanley Cup year. and they were so well prepared. They brought so much energy. You know, that's funny. Marv Albert, Sal Messina, Marv Albert, Bill Chadwick, Jim Gordon, Bill Chadwick. Those guys had energy. You know, they were enthusiastic all the time, and that I think maybe some of the guys today can watch some of those videos and learn.
Every Gary Thorne game was like Game 7. It could be It could be Wednesday night Flames Canucks in November, but if that game went to overtime, look out. You were getting a big call.
The best voice, I think, in all of sport. At that time, I don't know.
I love baseball, but I don't understand why we don't have. I mean, hopefully it's his choice why we don't have Gary Thorne, because I could listen to him call games. Him and Bill Clement
they were great. I don't know if after ESPN lost it that he wasn't interested or he didn't want to do any traveling. Interesting guy too. He's a former lawyer. I think he was a lawyer, I think, in the beginning. But what a voice! I mean, very few announcers have such a natural gift like Gary Thorne. And watching the Stanley Cup for Chicago when I was living there in Illinois, it was great. Him doing all those games, it was just, they were great. They really, really were. I can't really say I missed the Rangers team doing it. It would have been nice, but Gary Thorne you would never know that, you were listening to just an outside broadcaster doing the Rangers Canucks. They were just awesome for ESPN. And then, of course, the Mateau. We'd be remiss not mentioning the Mateau, the overtime goal against the Devils. Props to Howie Rose. I mean, that's another call that goes down in Rangers history as one of the best calls ever,
right?
Yeah,
of course.
We'd be remiss in not bringing that one up. Yeah, so interesting topic. Next time we'll get a player, we'll get player profile, and hopefully there'll be a dramatic change in the Rangers prospects. It'll be interesting to monitor the Panarin situation. I hope that works out for him and the club. I hope it doesn't become a prolonged thing. Closing thoughts, Rob, before we end the show.
Don't make any bad trades. Especially with the playoffs. I think they'll always, with the 56-game season, the playoffs will always be in reach for the Rangers. For a lot of teams, it's because you're not going to get those extra 20 plus games of separation. So,
right.
It's always going to be tempting. Don't do it.
That's true. Well, fans, thanks for tuning in today. Again, if you have any ideas as to who you want us to profile next time or any other topics, please let us know. On behalf of my colleague, Rob Berger, this is Tom Browning saying so long for the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.